Module 1. Get the message. Unit 1. Education.
You are going to hear a radio program called People Who Have Made a Difference, in which you will hear someone talking about their career as a teacher. You will hear the program in several parts. After each part, you will hear 2 to 4 questions. For each question, choose the correct answer. First, listen to the introduction and note the example question below.
Welcome to another edition of People Who Have Made a Difference. With us today, we have Dan Morris, an elementary school teacher. He has done more in 2 years than others have done in a lifetime. Welcome to the program, Mr. Morris.
Dan, please. And thank you for inviting me.
Dan, you teach in a public school in the neighborhood you grew up in. Did you also go to the same school?
Actually, I grew up in a neighborhood that's not too far from where I work. And no, I didn't attend the same school.
Example. Where does Dan work? The correct answer is C.
Sorry about that. So, Dan, could you tell our listeners what made you decide to become a teacher?
My love of books. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a poor neighborhood with my little brother and my father. My mother died when I was 4. We were always short of cash. There were times when we didn't have electricity because we couldn't pay the bills on time. But we had books, and I soon found out that they could take me anywhere. I could see the world without having to leave my room. I could have exciting adventures and live dangerously without risking my life.
1. Who brought Dan up? Two. What didn't Dan and his family have? Three. What did Dan like doing as a child?
You certainly didn't have it easy.
No, I didn't. Of course I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Patrick Lynch. He wasn't only one of my professors at college. He was a great mentor and a wonderful person. Funnily enough, I didn't think much of him at first because he seemed so traditional, but all that changed once I got to know him better. He was a harsh critic and reduced me to tears on many occasions. However, I learnt a lot from him and entered my profession with excitement and confidence instead of fear.
4. Who was Patrick Lynch? Five. What was Dan's first impression of Patrick? Six. How did Dan feel when he started teaching?
So what was your first day like? How did it feel?
Out of this world. I remember looking at my students and thinking, this is my destiny, to have this group of children before me. And a large group it was, I can tell you that. 30 kids. In some schools there will be 15 kids, 20 tops in a class. Anyway, I made up a story and gave them a funny speech about how strict I was and how I taught football players and prisoners, so a bunch of 5th graders wasn't much of a challenge.
7. What went through Dan's head on his first day? Eight. How many students did Dan have? 9. Who were Dan's first students?
Most of your students have trouble reading, isn't that right?
Yes, they have a poor grasp of phonetics. These children have a lot to deal with. Most of them come from broken homes. Some don't even have a roof over their head and are in and out of shelters. With a background like that, it's no wonder they have trouble reading. One of the first things I do is record samples of the children's reading. It's painful to see big kids struggling to guess the sound of each letter.
How do you help them?
I tell them we are going to make an alphabet museum for the kindergartners. Each day I assign a letter, and the following day students have to bring in interesting things beginning with that letter. That way, they get the alphabet practice that they need without having to feel ashamed.
10. What problem do Dan's students have? (11) What's the purpose of the Alphabet Museum?
Do you think that classrooms can motivate students?
Definitely. I did what all other teachers do to brighten up their classrooms and make them look stimulating, like hanging posters on the walls and putting students' projects up on the bulletin board. I also set up a classroom library for the kids to use. That's what makes my classroom unique. I remember when I finished setting up my classroom, the older teachers shook their heads and told me it looks overstimulating, which to me meant they were jealous. My uncle made the bookcase, and I bought the books myself since the school is on a tight budget and can barely afford the necessities. I had to work another job on Saturdays to make it all happen. That's why I was really angry when somebody stole a comic book about Columbus from the class library. I told the kids, whoever did it, just put it back on the shelf. But nobody did, so I locked all the books in the closet. The kids started complaining, saying it's not fair to punish the whole class for something one student did. I told them what I had to go through so that they could read good literature and that I wasn't going to leave my personal possessions out if I couldn't trust the people I'm with. A couple of days later, I found the book on my desk.
12. What does Dan have in his classroom that others don't? (13) What was the other teacher's reaction to Dan's classroom? (14) Who helped Dan buy the books? (15) What did Dan do about the stolen book?
You use games in your class. How effective are they?
Very. They make learning fun. Last year I made a time machine with my students. The idea was time travel through books. At first I was thinking of using an old refrigerator or a trunk when it hit me. I had this cupboard at home which I wasn't using. So I brought it in and with a bit of paint and imagination, we turned it into a time machine. I put a flashing red police car light on top and we glued various knobs and keyboards on it. Inside I put a bookshelf with history books, a comfortable pillow for sitting, and a flashlight attached to a phone cord. Students take turns in the time machine. They go in, the doors close, and off they go. The rest of the class reads silently. Half an hour later, we retrieve the person. You'll be amazed by what they have to say and every student has a different story to tell.
16. What was the purpose of the time machine? "17. What did Dan use to make the time machine? "18. What was inside the time machine?
How do your students do in the standardized reading and math test?
They have the best scores in the school. At least a 1-year jump in grade level for almost everyone, and several kids jump 2 or 3 years.
I'm impressed. Most teachers aren't proud of their students' test scores.
Yes. You know, I just remembered something that my mentor Patrick said. The difference between a teacher who just started teaching and an experienced one is that the former asks, "How am I doing?" and the experienced teacher asks, "How are the children doing?"
You are doing great, Dan. Keep up the good work and thank you for joining us today.
19. How many years in grade level do most of Dan's students jump? "20. What's the difference between experienced and inexperienced teachers?